I'm ready.
Okay. All right, so question number 1. How many countries does Mercy Corps work in? A, 15, B, 20, C, 31, or D, 43?
Gosh. Well, I want to keep it safe and go somewhere in the middle.
Okay.
But I think it's on a higher side. So I want to go with C31 with my final answer.
Final answer, Regis. Okay. Now we're going to see if my laptop has given up this delay thing that it's doing. Okay. Alrighty. I believe. Oops. Can you see the answer, Sean? Okay. So the answer was 43. You were close. 43. You were right that it was on an upper end. All right. Let's give you another shot. Plenty of opportunities. Okay, so switching gears to NASA. Who can use, access, and benefit from NASA satellite data? A, farmers, B, children, C, government officials, or D, all of the above?
Well, I know it's a public institution, so definitely government officials, but I also have been on there with my kids, so I'm going to say children. And then for farmers, I can imagine farmers need it, and also D, all of the above.
All right. You are correct.
Woohoo!
Beautifully done.
All right. One right, one wrong so far.
Are you going to keep score for yourself?
Oh, yeah.
Bragging rights. Okay. Next question. What kind of natural events can disrupt global and local food supply? A, hurricanes, B, wildfires, C, a pandemic, D, a drought, or E, all of the above?
Yeah. Well,
I would not choose any.
I have experienced like 2 of those so far. So again, I'm going to go with all of the above that I can imagine global and local food supply being impacted by all.
Seems reasonable. I'm going to assume that one of the 2 is a pandemic.
Yes.
What's the other one? I'm just curious.
Hurricanes from living in South Louisiana.
Oh, that's right. Oof. That's a story we'll have to talk about sometime. Okay, let's find out. Yes, all of the above. That makes sense. I see that. It should be noted that I haven't seen all of these trivia questions either. I'm learning too. Okay, moving on. How many people worldwide are suffering from food insecurity? Is it A, 250 million people, B, 552 million people, C, 750 million people, or D, 821 million people? Those are all big numbers.
That is, wow. Well, these are always tricky because, like you said, Alex, those are all big numbers.
Yeah. Those all fall into the scary category.
Yeah. Let's see. What is it? Worldwide. So many people worldwide?
Yeah.
Well, I went with C last time when I was on something like this, and I got that one wrong. So let's go with D this time. I'm going to go for the big number. Yeah.
Okay. 821 million people. Yes, you are correct.
Wow. Oh, wow. What a good map. That's interesting.
Wow. Oh, that is really interesting. I'm going to have to find that later.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, but for now, we're educators. We like to learn things. For now, we're going to learn about our next question. Okay, NASA launched TIROS-1, the first weather satellite, which also provided the first television image of Earth from space on April 1st of what year? A, 1958, B, 1960, C, 1972, or D, 1984?
Oh, this is a good one.
Yeah.
Wow.
I'm assuming not an April Fool's joke. Interestingly timed.
Let's see. First weather satellite. You know, I want to lean towards 1972, just thinking that I feel like 1960 was still early in the space program. But that's a big gap between 60 and 72. But I guess they all look like 12-year gaps. I'm going to go with C.
Okay.
1972.
72?
Yeah. Oh.
Ooh, 1960.
Wow.
A little early.
Go ahead, NASA. That's awesome.
They were ahead of your game.
Yeah.
Beautifully done. Super cool. All right, moving on. Another NASA question. On January 4th, 2018, so recently, NASA confirmed the Arctic ozone hole was recovering due to efforts based on which international agreement? A, the Pawnee Plan, B, Candor Chronology, these are great names, C, the Arkham Agreement, or D, the Montreal Protocol?
These are all great names. And I've only heard of one. So, and that would be D, the Montreal Protocol. But there's something about the Arkham Agreement that is just really calling
it's
my
really
name.
Speaking to you.
Yeah, I really want to go with the Arkham Agreement. So which one do I go for? What my gut or my brain?
What you think it is, or what you want it to be?
How do you feel? You don't have to answer which one you would pick, but how do you feel about this one, Alex? Do you have a strong sense of which one it is?
I personally have a guess, but I will also tell you why once we see the answer.
Okay. I'm going to go with the Montreal Protocol.
And indeed, you are correct. Props to whoever put these together, because the references are pretty choice. I recognize two of them, and now I'm curious about the third. Just testing how much TV you watch, I think. That's delightful.
Wait, is Arkham like Batman? Is that a Batman?
Yeah. Yeah, the Arkham Asylum.
Okay.
And Pawnee is, I believe, a Parks and Rec reference. I don't know about the other one, though, but I'm so curious. Okay. All right. Let's continue learning. One of the most iconic images of Earth was taken by the crew of Apollo 17 on December 7th, 1972. This famous photograph of Earth is commonly known as what? A, the blue marble, B, the azure planet, C, the cobalt orb, or D, the sapphire sphere. Some of these sound like superhero names.
Yeah. Huh.
Okay, best guess. What do you think?
1972. Well, yeah, I like all of these names. But I want to, I think I want to go with A, the blue marble.
The blue marble.
Because, yeah, I feel like I've heard that term more than these others. Okay. Although it's a shame, because I want to hear the term sapphire sphere much more now.
We'll work it into conversation.
Yeah.
Let's find out. Yes, the blue marble.
Yes.
Nailed it. Nice. We can refer to it as the others, though. All right. Couple more to go. Couple more chances. Okay. The countries of Yemen, Somalia, and South Sudan are often considered some of the most climate vulnerable. How much money do you think the two largest global climate donors have provided them to make them more climate resilient? Is it A, $0, B, $1 million each, C, $20 million each, or D, $100 million each to each of those countries to make them more resilient?
Wow. Yeah. This is another really tricky one.
This is a tough one.
Yeah. Just the first sentence in there is really neat there. I didn't realize those were the most some of the most climate vulnerable. But how much money do you think the two largest global climate donors? And who are the two largest global climate donors?
This makes me wonder this as well.
I'm going to say $1 million each. B.
$1 million each.
Oh.
Ooh, bad news bears, $0.
That seems like a problem.
There seems like something we should be able to do about that.
Wow. Okay.
Maybe we'll learn about it.
Yeah.
A little bit. We'll have to listen.
I am looking forward to this science a lot.
Absolutely. Okay, 2 more. What livelihood is often considered the most vulnerable to climate change? A, an Uber driver. B, a local small business owner. C, agriculture, farming, cattle raising, fishermen, etc. Or D, a government employee.
Okay, livelihood is often considered the most vulnerable to climate change.
And there's not an all of the above answer.
I know. I was waiting to are you going to click one and get an E here?
It's a secret one, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I would say, so all livelihoods will be vulnerable, I guess, in some way, but which one's the most vulnerable? I would have to say probably the farmers, ranchers, fishermen, etc. Agriculture, C.
Okay. Yep. Yeah. That makes sense. But you're right. It's going to hit everybody eventually.
Wow.
Okie doke. Final question. Ready?
Yes.
Okie doke. So this is sort of the topic of tonight's conversation, is this partnership between NASA and Mercy Corps. So how old is NASA and the Mercy Corps' official partnership under the Space Act Agreement? Is it A, 1 year old, B, 4 years old, C, 8 years old, or D, coming in at a decade at 10 years?
The NASA Mercy Corps partnership. Well, I want to get this one right because I know pretty soon after this, you're going to introduce some members from NASA and Mercy Corps.
The good news is I bet they're going to tell us anyway.
I know. Yeah.
Up to you.
Gosh, I'm going to say, oh gosh. I feel like it's, I don't know. I don't think it's 8 or 10, but I don't know. I would say, I'm going to go with B, 4. I think it's about probably, yeah.
It's been around for a minute. It's actually 1 year. We're celebrating the anniversary. First birthday. Go partnership.
Nice work.
Happy birthday, partnership.
Cool. I'm looking forward to hearing more about this partnership.
This is going to be awesome. Beautiful. How'd you do? I learned some things.
Yes, exactly. I think in all of my excitement, I forgot to keep score. I think I got 3 wrong.
I did that too.
I think I got 3 wrong. So, 70? A C? I
Solid. I think you passed from me. If I'm the host, then I'm the judge, and I think you did great. So, nicely done, Sean.
Thanks, Alex.
Thank you for joining us. That was awesome. It was nice to have you. Yay! And now, at this point, I hope you enjoyed learning some things about some global climate change. And now I would like to introduce our speakers. So let me introduce Dr. Shana McLean is the Global Partnerships Manager for NASA's Earth Science Division and the program lead for risk reduction and resilience for the Applied Sciences Disasters Program. Her work involves defining NASA's role in resilience through the development of projects in fragile and crisis-affected areas, and by employing Earth observations to better address the nexus of human and environmental systems. And we also have Elliot Levine as a climate change and environment expert with 19 years of experience in international development and conservation. He's currently the director of Mercy Corps Environment Technical Support Unit, leading a team which provides strategic support to Mercy Corps' global program portfolio as related to climate change adaptation, disaster risk reduction, low carbon development, natural resource management, and WASH. Y'all have really impressive titles. And with that, I will hand it over to you, Elliot.
Fantastic. Thanks, Alex. I'm just going to figure out my technology. Looks like that works just fine. Great. Well, thanks everyone for joining us, first and foremost, and I guess welcome to my house. Just want to, I think Shane and I want to just start by acknowledging that we really appreciate you guys spending the time with us to hear a little bit about the work that we're doing. We know everyone's lives are a little, chaotic, different, difficult. And so we just appreciate you guys signing on tonight and hearing a little bit about our work. I thought before I jump into some of the work that I'm going to talk about with Mercy Corps, we're going to give you a little bit more background on who I am as a person, and a little bit more about the work other than the professional bio. And you'll get a chance to hear from Shana about her background and her personal experience as well as she jumps into some of the work that NASA is before we start talking about the partnership. So to start, as I mentioned before, my name's Elliot. I think a good place to start, considering we're talking about climate change, environment, I'm giving a talk here with Shana from NASA. I think it's worth noting that, first of all, I'm not a scientist. I don't have a PhD. I don't, as a climate change person, someone who works on climate change, I'm not a climate scientist. I don't try to work on these fancy, very complicated climate models. But I am really a passionate user of science. My background's actually in more of public administration. So I have a public policy degree focused on really how to use science to solve big problems dealing with the environment. And climate change is obviously a really big problem dealing with the environment. I started my career off at World Wildlife Fund, where I worked for a number of years as a senior climate advisor, essentially helping them to figure out, as they're working on preserving really valuable ecosystems and species around the world, how do you take climate change into account to deal with those? How does it change those strategies? And I've been doing something similar at Mercy Corps now for the last 7 years. I actually realized that I just hit that 7-year mark about a month ago. It's just kind of flown by. And I get to, in my current role at Mercy Corps, I get to direct the Environment Technical Support Unit. This is basically a team of 8 really, really great people that I get to work with who are scattered all across the world. That's some of them in that photo right there. We have a team member that's based in everywhere from Austin, Texas to Romania, to Pakistan, and even scattered across Europe and the UK and places like Edinburgh, Scotland. And we're the Environment Technical Support Unit. So we cover a range of different things, a range of different technical areas related to the environment. So climate change being one of them. We focus on how natural resources are managed. We work on something called disaster risk reduction, of helping communities deal with the disasters in the places that they're living. But the thing that sort of runs through all of the work that we do is working on environmental issues, whether it's the environment as a solution to a problem or dealing with the environment as a problem itself. And our job really is in service of Mercy Corps' global network of people implementing programs around the world. So we are not geographically bound. We get to work everywhere. We're called upon by our country teams and our program teams to essentially help them design programs and design strategies. We oftentimes are getting flown in to work in places like Kenya or Mongolia or Timor-Leste or Myanmar to help them design a program, to sit with our country colleagues and identify challenges and figure out solutions to them. In other cases, we're helping to lead a training on a technical thing, on a new technical approach. Sometimes I'm called in to do an assessment to help figure out what's going on the ground. And so Mercy Corps can figure out how to leverage that information to do something about it. And then finally, we're what I would call pollinators, which is we take information that we learn in one country like Nigeria and say, how does this same information or that solution that worked in Nigeria also apply to Guatemala or Colombia or Mongolia or China or India? So it's a really interesting job. I get to spend about 30% of my year on the road, getting to work in these cultures, getting to work in these countries with these really unique individuals. And so it's inspiring. It's exciting. It's dynamic, but I have to say it's also really tiring sometimes. I just looked up because I was curious about how long it actually takes to fly from Portland, Oregon to Nairobi, Kenya, which I do more often than I'd like to admit. And it's 21 hours of flying time. So, it's as tiring as it is exciting, but it's by working with those people across Mercy Corps that makes the work really, really impactful. We're about 5,000 people worldwide. So those of you tuning in Portland, I know there's might be some others from outside of the area. Many people might be in Portland in particular, might be very familiar with Mercy Corps. We've been around for a while now, but most of the people who work for Mercy Corps don't look like me. They're not based in Portland at all. They're not even based in DC or New York or any other city. They're based in the countries we work in around the world. And I think that's something, a really strong thing that I want to emphasize. 87% of our employees are nationals, meaning they live and have grown up and work in the places that they're now working in. And that's really what makes the work so impactful. We're able to build on that knowledge, that deep cultural bond that those people have. So yeah, as I was saying, that's the reason we're able to have this huge impact. In 2018 alone, and every time I read this, I'm kind of blown away by it. We reached 28 million people in 40 different countries around the world. We work on a whole range of stuff. And you from those of you who follow us on Instagram or Facebook or things, you might see our work. We might be sending out posts that we work on health and wellness. We might be working with youth or pregnant women. We might be working on education issues and helping with job training. Quite a bit of our work is around ensuring people actually have adequate access to food and aren't going hungry. But I think if one thing frames the way we work, especially the way we're seen outwardly in the world, is that we're probably seen as responding to emergencies and disasters. You might have seen a post from us saying, donate or help, or we want you to be informed by the work that we're doing in an earthquake or a hurricane, or responding to a pest outbreak somewhere that's impacting agricultural communities. We absolutely do that work. We are a large NGO. We take our role in responding to disasters super seriously. But at the same time, we're also, in addition to being a humanitarian organization, an organization that responds to big disasters, we're also what we would call a development organization, meaning essentially we stick around. We're really interested in helping to ensure the long-term development of the communities and the countries and the context in which we work. And so that means that it's not just going to be solved in an immediate response, which can last up to from a couple of months to a year, but we're often invested in the places we work in for decades. Now, our goal is to work ourselves out of a job, but the issues that we're working on are really complex. And so we're not always able to get, solve or help work with our constituents to solve these big challenges in just a year or even a couple of years. These are really complex things that take time and working across a range of different institutions. And climate change is absolutely one of them. All those things that I just talked about, whether it's disaster response and recovery, or whether it's working on food security or ensuring people have access to water, it is pretty much impossible now not to consider climate change as we are doing any of that work. Now, the reason I put this quote up here is because I want to emphasize that climate change is happening right now. We often talk about climate change as something that's going to happen, something that's going to happen in the future. You see headlines that say climate change will make something occur. It will reduce the nutrients in our vegetables. It will cause more storms. It will cause more droughts. The fact of the matter is, though, climate change is already happening, and it's happening now on every single continent on this planet. There are signs of climate change everywhere around the world. And Mercy Corps, the institutions and our partners that we work with, and most importantly, the communities and people that we work with on the ground, including the governments that we partner with, they see it. It's something that I think we just should acknowledge a bit more. I also bolded here the word climate crisis because, and that's a little my annotation to this United Nations, not quite a quote, but statement by them. They use the word climate change, but increasingly we're seeing this word climate crisis being used to describe climate change. And I think that that's a much more adequate word to describe what we're dealing with as a global community. Climate change is a crisis, and we need to begin to start treating it that way. Now, I'm not going to, my portion of this talk is not, I promise, is not going to be based on a whole bunch of really depressing stories. In fact, I get to talk about what I think are solutions to climate change. And that's one of the reasons I like doing what I get to do, is that I get to focus on if there is a happy or silver lining side of climate change, it is that we can manage it and we can deal with it. But I do want to set some context, because climate change is affecting every place that we work, every place that anyone is living, and we need to acknowledge some of those challenges. The first thing I want to acknowledge is what the Food and Agriculture Organization, this is a UN organization that deals obviously with food, with agricultural issues. And one of their more recent reports noted that the number of extreme climate-related disasters has doubled since the 1990s, has doubled. So again, a great example of this isn't climate change is happening in the future. This is climate change has already been happening, and disasters are already becoming more prevalent in our society. And I'm sure everyone right now can think of a number of disasters they've heard about in the news or around the world. When I think about that, I just think about the number of families displaced, the number of governments striving to fix problems, the number of families being separated from one another, the sort of economic challenges they have. When you think about that number completely doubling since the 90s, it's a real challenge we have to work on. But to dig into that disaster element a little bit more, the second bullet here says that since 2001, droughts have wiped out enough produce to feed 81 million people every day for a year. A lot of organizations are working on reducing hunger throughout the world. If we're able to figure out how to manage droughts more effectively, we can make a huge impact on that. So droughts are a huge problem and a huge challenge that we have to overcome. And climate change is already making that challenge even harder as an organization that's trying to deal with it. Now, this final point I want to make, because Mercy Corps does work a lot on feeding people or getting food in the hands of people and reducing hunger. We also work, as we mentioned before, on disasters, but we also work a ton on conflict. I think oftentimes we think of conflict, we might think of religious-based conflict, cultural-based conflict, but in fact, actually natural resources, or the lack of them, so the lack of land, the lack of water, is a huge driving force of conflict around the world. And climate change, first and foremost, has its most immediate impact on natural resources. That is already right now driving conflict in many, many places around the world. There's increasing evidence to show that. And this report, A New Climate for Peace, which came out a couple of years ago, was a really influential report in that. If that topic interests you, I'd highly suggest Googling that and digging up that report. It's really interesting. But these are big challenges, and they're already seen, like we mentioned, they're already seen around the world. But you might be like this guy. You might be sitting here looking at this webinar, looking at me talking about this stuff and thinking, yeah, okay, I get it, it's bad, but I don't see it day to day. It doesn't affect my life. I'm doing what I normally do, and I keep hearing about climate change, but it's not really all that apparent. That's a completely profound thought. It's a really, really smart realization. And it's worth stopping and thinking about that for a moment, because it defines why Shana and I have the jobs that we have and why we're doing what we do. And that is, in the United States, we have policies, we have plans, we have technology, we have infrastructure, we have organizations who have the ability to help us to deal with the challenges we're already experiencing as a country. We can move water thousands, millions of miles across our country because we have the infrastructure to pipe that water around. We have the policies that allow different states to negotiate and to share resources with one another without fighting it out. We have the technology to help us understand when we have to get ahead of a disaster before it happens. These are not the luxuries that many countries around the world have. And as such, they're experiencing the impacts at a far larger rate than we are. They feel them a lot more than we do. So if you're not feeling it, just noting that doesn't mean it's not happening around the world in a much more extreme way, but it can sometimes be a bit challenging maybe to pick it out. So what I want to do is spend a little bit of the rest of my time talking about stories of some of the work Mercy Corps has been doing around the world to help communities adapt. And maybe this will feel good. You've all been locked up in your houses like myself for far too long. So maybe we can all imagine that we're kind of teleporting ourselves, not getting on planes because that sounds unsafe at the moment, but if we could teleport ourselves around the world to these different places. So the first place we're going to drop ourselves is in Nepal, sandwiched right there outlined in red between India, sandwiched right there above India. Now, Mercy Corps and a lot of organizations have been working in Nepal and countries like it for many, many years. And one of the things that we often work on as development institutions is working to reduce disasters or working to reduce the impact that disasters have on communities. It's a huge field of work, disaster risk reduction, and it's a big challenge. We've made a lot of headway as a community of organizations who address it. But there are a number of challenges remaining in doing good disaster risk reduction. The biggest one actually has to do with the sustainability of the interventions we're dealing with in the first place. Not to get too much into the weeds of it, but most of the work that organizations like us do, and even governments in preparing communities to deal with disasters, is based on a project cycle. So Mercy Corps or another organization like us gets some money to work with a community to help them work with a community to help them deal with some type of a disaster situation they might have. It might be floods, it might be earthquakes, it could be landslides. And those programs can go great. We have a history of doing that work, and organizations like ours knows what work and what doesn't. But the fact of the matter is those programs end, the money dries up. And at that point, it's up to the communities and governments to be able to continue to invest in those disaster risk reduction structures, those strategies, those plans. That is really, really difficult to do when you have to prioritize putting food on the table, prioritizing how are you going to get your kids in school the next day, being able to pay your bills, making sure that you have the medicine that you need to have for your family. And those trade-offs can be really challenging. And all too often, all that work is eroded over time as communities are hard pressed to be able to continue to invest in them. So that's the reason that one of the things Mercy Corps has been trying to do, knowing that disasters are increasing, the need for disaster risk reduction by communities is only increasing as well. We've had to find ways of making the solutions that help reduce disaster risk also help put food on the table and money in people's pockets. And so we've been working with disaster risk reduction committees in communities just like this. So this woman and the people behind her are part of a disaster risk committee in Nepal that we work with on a fairly regular basis to find strategies that both generate income and reduce the risk. And in Nepal, one of the big risks, especially in this community that we're working in, is flooding. Flooding is a major, major challenge in many places, especially due to climate change, where we're seeing in places like Nepal, increasing severe storms. So this dumping of a ton of water, which leads to really the expansion of the rivers and the rivers flowing much faster and with, just basically flowing a lot faster with a lot higher volume of water. And that can be a big problem when you live in shelters and communities that look a lot like this. Built out of locally procured materials, wood harvested from a forest. You can see the walls of that guy's house right there is made of mud and earth. And these are pretty susceptible to being damaged by flooding. At the same time, these communities live right next to these rivers. Now, this river in particular might not look that large, but this isn't the monsoon season. You can see actually how large that river might get. And the thing to know about these, which is kind of fascinating, is that they shift pretty strongly. So they can move many, many feet over where there is infrastructure or fields at a given time. And this wipes out thousands of villages, thousands of agricultural fields. It erodes the soil. It rips out plants from the ground. It destroys people's homes and buildings. And it's a real threat to many communities across Nepal and other places in the world. So what we, again, tried to do was come up with a solution that would both put money in people's pockets and food on tables while also reducing those risks of that flooding. And one of the solutions, we've come up with many now to work in different contexts, but one of them that's proving to work really well is actually the planting of sugarcane. This is a large field of sugarcane that's now been planted alongside these riverbeds that, like the one you just saw in the past photo. And what sugarcane does is it extends its deep roots into the ground, holding on to the earth, preventing that soil erosion from happening and the pulling away of that land, which can cause a huge amount of damage. But all that vegetation soaks up the water. It also slows down the currents of those water, reducing all the damage done to those villages. So it's proven to be really effective on that front in actually reducing risk in the communities that we've been implementing this. But the question is, how is it putting money on the people's table? And this degraded old mill actually is the answer to that. This is one of a few molasses mills in Nepal. And one thing that we did as we were starting this program, in addition to doing a fairly standard disaster risk assessment to identify the challenges, we also undertook a different type of assessment, one we would call a market systems assessment, where we look at different components of the economic system in a country or in a particular community, and identify opportunities to engage where certain services or products could be expanded for where there's need. And one of them we found out was in the molasses industry, where we found that there was actually more demand for molasses than there was supply. So there was a really good opportunity here to link those sugarcane producers with these molasses mills to be able to generate income. And that's what's happening now. A couple times a year at the right times, communities are harvesting a portion of their sugarcane crop, selling it to these molasses mills, which are growing as Mercy Corps and others continue to invest in their technologies and in their ability to scale their businesses, and putting money on the table. And so now there's actually economic incentive to continue these DRR structures throughout the year. So that was one example of where we're working at a very local community level. And now we're trying to expand that. We're bringing that work to Timor-Leste. We're expanding it to Myanmar, and we're expanding it to Indonesia. At least that's the plan we have at the moment. I also want to highlight now where we're working at the national level as well. And here, we're going to move our way a bit further north and a bit further east to Mongolia. If you've ever had the great opportunity to fly to Mongolia, it's absolutely stunning. It is such a beautiful place to be. It is mountainous, it is green, it is not that, the people are dispersed across a really large landscape. So a lot of its beauty, its natural beauty is still there. And as you can see here, people rely on the natural environment around it to survive. A lot of them are herders leading nomadic lifestyles or pastoral livelihoods, meaning they move their cattle and their animals around where the resource to go where the resources are. This one family in particular is one of them. As you can see, the houses behind them are their yurts. These are easily movable around the landscape. They pack them up and put them on their animals and can move them around to move where the resources are. Unfortunately, this picture here is actually a photo of a family that had to recently move away from their herding lifestyle as a result of zoods. Zoods are unique to Mongolia. They're actually a two-seasonal event. It is a really, really dry spring and summer, so really, really dry, lower than expected rain, followed by a really, really harsh winter. So what that means is that really dry summer means people don't have the ability to harvest enough hay to feed their animals. Then they don't have enough food during that really, really harsh winter to feed them. And so all that investment people put in their animals, all that money and resources and time that their livelihood relies upon is now lost to that zood. And it's a really challenging experience. And for many, many, many communities, that means having to leave that lifestyle and moving to cities in search for jobs, which can be really challenging when they don't have the skills necessary. So one of the things Mercy Corps has been trying to do is actually put information, early warning information, market information in the hands of the community members like that family who need it. And one of the things we did was we actually brought together a whole range of different actors in the technology world to develop apps that could be used by really remote populations like these that make up a large part of the country. We're lucky enough that we can look at our phones every morning. We can pull up our iPhones or our Android phones or whatever, or log onto our computers and figure out what the weather is that day. We can find out if, next week or next month, if it's supposed to get hotter or colder. We kind of know what's going on around us. It can be really challenging to make decisions, though, when you don't even have access to that basic information, especially early warning information when ZUDs are increasingly common occurrence in places like Mongolia. And so the app we developed looked to use already existing technologies. In fact, we used one of them was called Dark Skies, which is on my phone right now. Many of you in Portland might use it. It's a cool weather app. And we tried to get it to apply to phones that were not, smart, that were based on text messages instead. And now as a Mongolian herder, you can send a coded text to this application center, and you can get immediately geographic specific information about your weather, about any early warning information. You can get access to grazing information for where around you is good grazing information based on some work that Mercy Corps did with universities to track grazing conditions. And importantly, you can also get access to information around markets. Who is buying and selling products for the price, so you can know where to go sell your animals if you were to want to do so before a big ZUD event. This has proven to be actually incredibly popular with not only people wanting to use it, but people willing to pay for that service, which has prompted now the government of Mongolia and the local cellular companies to take control over this thing. So while Mercy Corps facilitated tech companies coming together to develop this product, we've been able to now work with government and the Mongolian cellular companies to take over the ownership of this entire thing. So it is actually no longer a Mercy Corps thing at all. You can see our country director there with the blue tie standing all the way to the right in the back, surrounded with government ministers and the mobile companies in the front, signing all the agreements that basically say that they're taking control over this for the future, with the goal of expanding the user base to even more so and adding additional services. And the cool thing is, and I don't always get photo stories that are able to show this, but this same family has recently come back and is now one of the users of this system, in part because they can make better decisions around extreme events that are all too more common in the face of climate change. So this is, I think, a great example of where I'm really happy to see a group like Mercy Corps be able to influence national level capacity to manage these things. So working at the community level was the first example, now getting to work at the national level. The third and final example I want to give you just before handing it over to Shana comes from Kenya. And in particular, a county in Kenya that's highlighted in red there called Wajir. Wajir is really, really dry, and the opposite of Mongolia in that it is incredibly hot. And as you can see, camels are pretty prevalent there. Camels are major, herding camels around this landscape through a pastoral lifestyle is one of the major livelihoods of the region. In addition to helping to make money they're incredibly important from a social and cultural aspect. The size of your herd, the health of your herd is who you are as a person. It's what your pride is. It also produces really intense nutrient-rich milk, which is really important from a food security perspective in the region. Their whole business is surrounded around camel milk, whether it's production of camel milk yogurts or other camel milk-based products. I had a chance to try it once, actually, and the local way of ensuring that it's safe to drink is you boil it over a fire in a gourd, and because the water is really salty there because they get it out of the ground and it's not very filtered, it essentially tastes like really salty, really smoky milk that's incredibly hot while you're drinking it in about what feels like over 100 degrees weather. So it's not the most pleasant from someone who hasn't been drinking it for a while, but it is really interesting in its flavor. Now, the challenge in many of these places is that they have so many different adaptation needs. You can work on water management. You can work on herd management. You can work on climate smart agriculture. You could work to reduce the risk of droughts. The amount of challenges that individuals like this woman here face because of climate change is just immense. On top of that now is a problem of actually getting money into the hands of people like this woman here to actually do something about it. You may have heard, if you're keeping up with any of the climate change news, you may often hear a lot about how much money is being spent to help communities around the world adapt to climate change. And it's true, there are trillions of dollars in commitments to that, of which the US has put money into and many other big Western countries have put into. Trillions of dollars that are sitting out there in banks and with national governments and in foundations, and all over the world there are entities that are trying to fund this work. But by most estimates of institutions that study this, 11% or less actually make it down onto the ground in the hands of people like this woman who can put it to good use. And so the challenge becomes is, how do you move money through a really hard bureaucratic system of global banks from different countries around the world, so it makes it into the hand of a woman like this, so that she can put good use to it in terms of adapting to climate change. And that's the problem Mercy Corps is trying to solve. How do we make that happen? How do we jump all those hurdles? So we've been working with governments, national governments and county governments, or regional governments, any government entities that exist under the national level, to figure out how to do this. And there's a number of hurdles to jump. So there's administrative hurdles, there's financial hurdles. We're working to train government employees to be able to do the assessments they need to do, to be able to fill out the paperwork they need to fill out, to set up the bank accounts they need to set up, and to address what seem like fairly easy challenges, but are really hard to do in places like Wajir, to be able to get the money into the hands of the people who need it most. And so we've piloted a number of solutions there, and now we're working to expand those solutions, those tactics, to not just other places in Kenya, but across Africa and Asia. So I'll leave it there with those three examples of working at the local community level, national level, and also the international level on the climate finance of what I find to be really inspiring solutions to some of the climate challenges we're facing. And I'll hand it over to Shayna.
Okay, thank you so much, Elliot. That's really interesting. So I'm going to start off in the same format that Elliot used. I'll talk a little bit about myself, a little bit about the work that I do with NASA. I'll give you one example, and then we're really going to dive into the partnership element, since that's what we're here to talk about today. So essentially a little bit about myself. I'm an environmental scientist, I'm a social scientist, but I also identify as a humanitarian. I grew up in Florida, and a lot of my passions are really centered around the resources that I grew up with. That's rivers, lakes, and also eventually oceans. And I started my bachelor's degree really hoping to turn what my passions personally into something that was what I could do professionally. And so essentially, I started looking initially at different aquatic resources, specifically the health of ecosystems in both rivers and estuary environments. And during my time at Florida State University getting my bachelor's, I got to a point where I took on an internship with the Nature Conservancy. And it really, I think, was a pivotal point for the rest of my future. I thought that in working with them, I would be able to get into the field and take water samples and do some of the science that I'd been studying. But instead, they asked me to go to the capital. FSU is in Tallahassee, the capital of Florida, and they wanted me to speak to legislators about the need for policies that supported the science that Nature Conservancy was doing. And it seemed quite out of my wheelhouse, but it was very, I think, almost poetic that I had that position, because I became a better communicator, I think, as a result of that opportunity. And also it allowed me to really learn how far we get with science alone. It's not far. I mean, we need people who are driving not just science-based policy, but science policy. And so that's really, ever since then, become a passion of mine. So both with my master's In my PhD, I sought a combined environmental science and policy degree. And really, in order to connect these things, you really need to be able to bridge the gap between a lot of the policies that are happening at the national level and how you manage the resources at the local level. And so a lot of the work I did with the social science element was working with communities locally to protect their different resources. Most often this is a trade-off with natural resources management. So I work in contexts of environmental migration and also environmental peace building and conflict. And so what's happened, I think, is that you often see that we need these resources to live, but either we're living in situations where the resources don't exist, or simply we're mismanaging these resources. Above all, what I would say in these two settings is that I'm really a proponent of making science understandable and relevant and usable to people like Elliot, to organizations like Mercy Corps. And so it's really been an enjoyable partnership working with Elliot and with his colleagues. And finally, before I move on, I would just say that after my master's degree, I did end up going on to work for the UN for a little while. We had a specialized unit with the Office of Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs and UN Environment. And it's very complementary to some of the things that Elliot was saying, where a lot of the mandates are really these lives first policies. But in a rush to save lives, we can often end up putting people in areas or situations of additional harm, meaning that one of the responsibilities we had at the unit was working with radiological, technological, and industrial accidents, usually cascading events that are naturally caused. Maybe there's a hurricane that causes an oil spill, or the Fukushima event where you see an earthquake, tsunami, and then nuclear disaster occur. But in any case, we're looking at the displacement of people. And so when we move populations, even if it's temporarily, a lot of times it's a failure to consider the environment that puts them at greater risk. And so this is an element that I'm bringing to the partnership and also to the work that I do with NASA as well. And so when I talk about my role at NASA, my main title, as you heard earlier, is to be the Global Partnerships Manager. This means I'm leading the partnership with Mercy Corps, which is what we're here to talk about today. But also we're working with other partners, including Microsoft, Conservation International, and Google, all of which approach, I think, really complex challenges from different perspectives. And so it's really been a pleasure to have this position. I also help NASA and the disasters program within applied sciences in particular to look at issues related to disaster risk reduction and resilience and how we can use Earth observation data in order to understand some of these complexities. And so while many of you probably already know very well what NASA is, I'll just briefly say it's the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. We're an independent US government agency that really advances science and technology through research with a vision to discover and expand knowledge for the benefit of humanity. And I think the way that we really do that is twofold. With what you see here, there are a number of ways in our missions into space, either with our astronaut program, with our missions to the moon or to Mars, that the science in getting us to really see those innovations ends up affecting our daily lives. So in some cases, it's refining GPS systems, which all of us use, or it's something kind of unthought of, which is in the work that we're doing to understand life support with our Mars missions. We were able to essentially identify a vitamin that's now being used in the majority of formulas for babies around the world. The secondary impact that I would say that's really benefiting us is the way that we look at Earth, the way that we see the Earth change, and the way that we look at it as a system. And what I would say in regard to this specifically is that with my job with the UN, we were worried about the considerations of the environment in this humanitarian work. But with NASA, we're really focused on the environment. And so what we've been looking at is really trying to better integrate these different elements in order to make sure that we're looking at the complexities. It's not just the environment alone, it's not the human dimension alone, it's the intersection of these elements. NASA's been partnering for a long time, and this is evident not just in what we're building with different people, different agencies, organizations, or entities, but also in the satellites that we develop. We have 23 satellites looking at Earth at any given time, but a lot of these have been built with different space agencies, partner countries, and just really reflective of our overall spirit of partnership. And some of the things that we can see when I'm talking about what we see Earth changing are things anywhere from here, this image of the growth of a delta over time in the Atchafalaya Basin in Louisiana. We can see the difference in land cover and land use change. This is an image of wetland agriculture in blue and dryland agriculture surrounding it. But it's also interesting that we can see this in relation to where the cities are located. And oftentimes we're using this information as proxies for access. We can see cities grow. We can see where the lights are on, when they're off. And we can also understand what this change in electricity usage means in relation to impending hazards that we see traveling across the world or occurring across the world all of the time. I'll give you one brief example of the work that we're doing. Last year, for about a year and a half now, I've been working with a team of NASA scientists out of Goddard Space Flight Center in Marshall, but also with scientists from Columbia's University's International Research Institute and partners that are working in the field from UN Development Program, the UN High Commission for Refugees, and the International Organization of Migration. Essentially what's happened is in 2017, there was a large influx of Rohingya refugees fleeing Myanmar, fleeing persecution and violence, and seeking shelter and refuge with the Bangladesh, in Bangladesh from the Bangladeshi government. In a rush to accommodate the nearly 1 million people, they had to rapidly deforest large tracts of land and create areas for the development of temporary housing. In doing so, though, they were under stress. And so in the deforestation ends up creating a lot of destabilized situations with where the settlements were placed. It's also an area of additional risk because it's an area that's affected often by cyclones and has a regular monsoon season, both of which create a lot of high winds and a lot of flooding that can lead to both flash floods and landslides. And so what you see here is not just an incredible density of people living in very informal, really just aluminum roofs with nothing more really, protecting them from the environment, to now being faced with either their settlement, the only home they know, now potentially being lost to a landslide or a flash flood. The work that we did in this region was done directly with our partners in country because it helps us identify how to work together, what the challenges are, and then figure out a way collaboratively in order to solve some of these problems. And so in this instance, what we did was work with our partners to develop a landslide susceptibility tool. And this is what you see in the upper right-hand corner. So we were able to gather a different, quite a large set of different types of data. It's NASA data on soil moisture, precipitation, and slope, but we also received data from our partners at IOM that provided digital elevation models, and there are camp managers that walk the camps every day and take qualitative measurements of what's going on on the ground in regard to the risk of landslides with individual camps. At the end of the day, we were able to create a tool that was not only usable and relevant to the challenges that were identified, but it was something that we could transition over to our partners and really therefore build the capacity. And, just building off of a point that Elliot made earlier, I mean, we're really looking to be able to provide a way of answering some of these challenges, but not stay there forever. And so it was really great to see that even to this day, after we transitioned it over a few months ago, they're still using it. And the three main ways they've been able to use it is, one, to understand individual settlements that are at high risk of landslide susceptibility or failure. They can also use it to pre-position supplies. And finally, they're able to understand where to build future settlements. So quickly moving on to our shared vision, this is now going to focus specifically on the work that Elliot and I do together, and that what our teams of scientists and technical units do together. But I briefly say that, it may seem, a questionable, like, why Mercy Corps and NASA? But I think the way that we approach problems is actually it's very different, but we have a similar goal in mind, meaning that while Mercy Corps looks, at the socioeconomic elements, the governance elements, and environmental elements that are creating challenges on the ground, we can see a lot of this from space. We can see how what's happening in one community where Mercy Corps is working is affecting or maybe being affected by the communities where Mercy Corps is working. And so we can take their ability to understand one community and then look at it from a larger distance up above from our satellites and understand what that means from either a national perspective, maybe a river basin perspective, or these larger landscape scales. But all of it is done in the end with the benefit of human lives and humankind in mind. And finally, just a couple comments on what really goes into our partnership. Elliot and I joke around a lot. I think about the first phone call that I joined with Mercy Corps technical units and NASA scientists. I remember thinking that I may be out of my depth with NASA because we were looking at a lot of abstract images that I thought might be art. It turns out they were just ways of looking at groundwater that I'd never seen before. And our scientists talked a lot about, validity of models and the different statistical ways that they were running samples. All of these things are incredibly important, but it didn't really mean that we were getting to this idea of supporting decision-making with science. And so what we've really spent our time doing is learning how to talk together, learning how to spend a lot of time having a lot of meetings, having a lot of phone conversations, and really understanding how each other works, how each other speaks, and creating a shared vernacular or dialogue so that we can come to the table and really, make the progress and see the kind of change that we want to see happening in the world. So pictures that you see here are in part some of the workshops that we've run, really bringing our teams together, in order to come together and understand that we really are actually, not only are we speaking somewhat of the same language, we have approaches that can complement the way each other thinks about things. And finally, just to go back to the trivia question, I'd say in the upper left-hand corner, you see Sandra Kaufman from NASA and Dina Esposito from Mercy Corps signing our Space Act agreement. And again, just last month marks the year of the signing of agreement. And really what it was a signing of our excitement to work together. We'd been talking for quite a while and really building the foundations of our partnership. But now we can, I think, celebrate our successes. And so now Elliot's going to move on and talk about the examples of how we've actually been working together. Elliot, back to you.
Great. I'm just getting that technology going again. Okay, fantastic. Thanks, Shana. All right, so I'm going to talk to you all a little bit about some of the partnership activities that we have done. And I think Shana did a good job of sort of just explaining how we've been working together and how much it takes a shared effort to learn how one another speaks. And I think one thing I'd like to sort of add in addition to what Shana mentioned is how much of a sort of complementary relationship we've had. I often have to explain to Mercy Corps folks who are still getting attuned to the partnership that this is not just Mercy Corps calling on NASA and saying, hey, we need some data or we need some imagery. Can we have it? And then Shana and her colleagues beaming us over some information over the internet. It is so much more than that. It is developing this shared dialogue. It's developing a shared way of working. And there are not easy solutions to the problems that we're trying to solve together. And certainly just NASA beaming over some information or some imagery to Mercy Corps is not going to solve it. It takes a lot of work to figure out what are the types of analytics and what are the types of ways of processing all the really valuable information and data that NASA has at its fingertips to be able to apply to these problems. And that's something that takes both institutions to wrap our heads around those problems. So I'm going to give you 3 quick examples of really cool stuff that I think we're doing together. The first one is around what I would consider to be context analysis. In many of the places that we work, a lot of the first thing that Mercy Corps and other actors try to do is we try to understand what's going on. What are the different things that our programs are trying to solve for? And that can be really challenging to do. Now, we have assessment tools that we've used for a long time that are useful and worthwhile, that rely on interviews with local decision makers, rely on bringing groups of communities together. But you got to face it, at some point, the problems that we're trying to solve get so big and so complex that we need to be able to take essentially a gigantic step back from them and to be able to bring computing power and technical experts that scientists at NASA have to be able to better understand them, to be able to see these challenges from the scope of the planet and to be able to bring minds that exist within NASA and apply their expertise to that problem. And so nowhere is that more relevant than the Sahel region of Africa, that band of really dry area that runs across the continent, and in particular, and in particular around in general in places like Mali. And so one of the things that we're actively working on now is a context analysis that can help us to understand those dynamics. And we're looking to understand things that are not easy, right? Like desertification, the changing from green lands to increasingly drier deserted lands. We're looking at issues related to water scarcity, the dwindling of water resources that is absolutely necessary for human health and economic development. Conflict dynamics. In many cases, that same water security issue, that getting access to water, is leading to increasing conflict and migration, movement of people, not just within a country, but across borders. NASA is really helping us right now to bring in data and pull that together into a model to help us to be able to apply that to the different places we're working so that our programs can say, here's the leverage point. Here's where Mercy Corps needs to put its efforts, its money, its people on the ground to now tackle that problem. And it's really, really inspiring to be able to work with NASA scientists who are able to tell us, oh yeah, we have access to that information. And oh yeah, we would need to figure it out, but we can work with you to analyze how desertification and conflict are actually related to some way, because that gives us a new, unique insight on how to address that problem. So that's one area where we're working together, and I'm really, really excited about it because it can be applied in many places around the world. The second area that we're working on right now is on extending information, especially early warning and risk information that is so important for disaster risk reduction, like we were talking about earlier in Nepal or in Mongolia, and building the capacity of governments to be able to have access to that. The great thing about working with Shana and NASA is you don't just get NASA, you get all these individual programs and initiatives and things that are happening within NASA. And one of them that we've gotten a real pleasure to work with is this group called Severe. Severe is sort of an international and capacity building and training initiative or a program within NASA that has hubs all over the world that are working with governments to build their ability to manage environmental and climate-related risks and hazards. One of the places they work is in Asia, and they have a Himalayas hub. Our team in Nepal has begun to work more closely with that hub and realized that those NASA employees and those entities is actually had built out what they call these services. One of the service they built out for national level government stakeholders or decision makers was an early warning system to predict landslides and floods. Mercy Corps thought that maybe that same information could also be applicable and useful to community members in really rural, far to reach places that are actually affected by these floods and these landslides. And so we acted sort of like as a last mile distributor, taking that information, getting it into the hands of the people who need it, and seeing how they can use it. Now, we're really lucky that we have a partner like NASA that allows us to use these products and get them out there. And we were also really happy to be able to then take that information back and say, hey, here's how it was useful. Here's what was helpful. Here's what we would advise if we want to continue to make this more useful to communities on an ongoing basis. Here's what we would do, what we would need to do together to adapt the tool. And that's one example where we're already seeing the opportunity to take existing NASA products and really leverage them in a way that they haven't been able to be done by our community of institutions of international development and humanitarian actors. So that's another area that I'm really, really excited about. The third and the final area that I want to mention on is an area of work around food security. We talked a little bit about this before, and that the challenge around food security. This is really important in terms of climate change too, right? As temperatures increase and rainfall becomes less variable, this is putting an incredible amount of pressure on farmers. Now, as I think we said maybe in one of the trivia questions in the beginning, 80% of 80% of the world that's considered in lower income countries actually survives on what we would call small scale farmers or smallholder farmers. These are farmers that have a very small acre of land. These aren't really, really large fields, but together they feed 80% of low income countries. So that's a lot. They're really important. But a quarter of the crops that those grow, a quarter of all those crops that 80% of those populations rely on are projected to fail or not become productive in the face of climate change challenges like droughts, famines, pests. That means that's estimated to mean an additional 3 billion people will start to go hungry. So this is a big challenge that a partnership like NASA and Mercy Corps can begin to really sink its teeth into. And that's something that we're working on right now, bringing together Mercy Corps' knowledge of farmers and what they need on the ground with the technology that NASA and the expertise that NASA brings. We're doing that by working with another really cool initiative and group within NASA called Harvest. Harvest, as you could probably tell by its name, essentially looks at applying Earth observation data and technology to issues of food security and agriculture. So this is like the perfect group within NASA to work with. And we're looking to apply those NASA technologies to a program that we have been testing out over the past couple of years called AgriFin. And AgriFin essentially looks at putting information in the hands of farmers so they can solve the challenges they need. And no challenge is bigger right now than figuring out how to produce food in the face of climate change. So AgriFin helps to provide, basically uses digital services, assuming that many places around the world, especially in the countries that the AgriFin program is working on, has a phone, right? Farmers have access to technology in many of the places, and in particular those in which AgriFin is focused on because it's a prerequisite of us working there. And that means you can get information in their hands. So AgriFin to date has been working on getting climate smart agricultural information in their hands, or agricultural information in their hands, has been working on getting access to digital financial products like savings and loans. It's been working on helping them with logistics, like helping them to know where buyers and sellers are so they can figure out where to buy things they need to produce food and when and where to sell at the price they need. We're now working with NASA to bring in all of their climate and environmental data to provide additional information on top of that. So to provide more granular environmental data that can inform climate smart agricultural solutions, to inform early potential products like early warning systems that can help inform how farmers make decisions in the face of a drought or floods or other major challenges they're dealing with climate change, all in the hope of making sure that these food systems that, again, 80% of low-income farmers rely upon are stronger than they were before. I'm going to end us on one final video, if I can do this correctly, that will hopefully sum this up faster than I was able to do it in person. I tried to embed this in my PowerPoint and it did not work, no matter how many times I tried.
Meet Eunice. Small-scale farmers like her run 9 in 10 of the world's farms, feeding millions against all odds. But the odds are getting tougher. As our climate changes, small-scale farmers can no longer produce enough food for a growing world. Already, nearly 1 billion people are going hungry. By 2050, that number will triple. So at Mercy Corps, we're transforming the way farmers feed the world. We listened closely to them, their experiences, challenges, and wisdom. And we created AgriFin, catalyzing a network of partners to provide the resources farmers need most, delivered direct to their mobile phone. Education to grow more resilient crops, access to quality seeds and fertilizer, banking services to strengthen their business, and connection to buyers for their goods. Now, AgriFin will add the expertise of NASA scientists to provide powerful environmental data so farmers can better cope with a changing climate. And together we can turn this moment of crisis into an opportunity for transformation.
Great. So I hope that I'm going to just quickly stop this and go back to our presentation. So I'm hoping that gives you guys and everyone online a really good example of how this partnership is beginning and the types of initiatives and the scales of challenges that we're working on. I think we're ready to wrap up, but Shana, I just want to give you a chance to make any final comments that you'd want to make.
Thanks, Elliot. No, I mean, I think you've said it well. We're really excited about, I think, all the progress we've made so far. And I think all we see are new opportunities ahead of us. And so thanks for taking the time to listen to us and talk about our work. And we're interested in taking any questions you might have. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks, everybody.
Yay. Thank you too. Thank you so much that was really wonderful, really sort of eye-opening and moving. I don't know, I can only speak for me. But thank you so much to Elliot Levine and Dr. Shana McLean. And so you mentioned we can take some questions now. Excuse me. So we have a couple questions from our audience, and I'm also sneaking in a couple of my own just because I'm curious. I count as audience, right? So my first question for you two is, so we heard a lot about your work and the wonderful things you're doing, but just kind of, what is it like to be growing this partnership between scientists and humanitarians and sort of like bringing those two communities together?
Shana, you want to take the first stab at that one?
Sure. I mean, I think it's really interesting. You know, I think you have to kind of find people, I think, who are really kind of interested and willing to take, I wouldn't say a risk, but to take kind of a leap towards innovation, right? You know, I think not everybody is going to come from the same background, right? And so there are a lot of people at NASA, and rightly so, that are just completely enamored with like how we can use the data and how it can be analyzed and seeing what we can do beyond what the initial intended mission was, you know, and you don't want to take people like that away from that passion, you know, but in order to explore a relationship like this, because there is a lot of learning and you are essentially testing new methodologies, like new ways of working together, you have to be ready, you know, to kind of, I think on one hand, Elliot mentioned it a little bit, but you know, we work at different timelines. We're funded differently. There's a lot of push and pull, I would say. And so if you're patient, but you're interested and passionate in kind of really exploring things that it's another way of saying we don't know these things. We don't have the answer. And so, I think I would say that it's exciting. I think so. It's one of my favorite parts of my job. And the people at Mercy Corps are just an incredible pleasure to work with. And so, I think it keeps the light alive. But, I think you have to find the right people. And the translation element really was quite, I don't know, at least on my side, it was a new environment working at NASA. And so I think we've come a long way. And yeah, it was challenging, but now we laugh a lot. That's what I would say.
I would say that the moment that I realized that the partnership was going to work, which is, to answer your question, I'd say it's inspiring and scary and challenging all at the same time. Because as Shana mentioned, there were conversations where we didn't understand each other's language. But I still remember the first time we had an opportunity to have someone from NASA join a big program design session we were doing in Niger. And the coolest thing about that was I watched my Nigerian colleagues have this aha moment around groundwater that they had not been thinking about at all. And as soon as that happened, so many of the sort of thought processes they had, the strategies that they were developing started to change to account for the fact that we were not considering the limitations of groundwater within the way we were approaching agriculture. And it was like you could literally see the light bulb go off of their head thanks to some of the work that the NASA teams were doing. And that's where that inspiration comes, is we want more of those sort of aha light bulb moments with our colleagues. That is like, okay, I have to do this completely differently than I was doing it before. Thank you for that.
Kind of developing that new mindset.
Pretty much.
Super cool. So this is a question from one of our audience members. How can someone get started in a career working to help this kind of work? Or I guess, do you have any advice for anyone looking to get into this kind of realm? Would it be helpful if I designated a person to start?
Yeah.
Sure. Ellie, you want to go first this time?
Sure.
Okay.
I went under the bus last time, so that means I get to go first this time.
It's okay.
So, I guess, there's so many different ways that I could answer that question. I think the best thing for me, as I was going, you could start with the easy answer, which is going to, figuring out what you want to study in school and all of that is great. And, there's certain fields you could choose from. But in reality, whether you're sitting in an organization or an agency like NASA or one like Mercy Corps, the opportunities and the sort of pathways you can go down are just almost limitless in terms of the types of things you can work on. And so I think the number one thing you can do for yourself and to make you more sort of desirable by people who actually have positions open is getting as much experience as you can. The number one thing I tell any sort of folks that are asking me this normally is internships are amazing because you actually get hands-on opportunities. And organizations like Mercy Corps have regular internships every single summer in DC and Portland, for example, with colleges. There's volunteer opportunities. There's things like that. I honestly think that just getting that experience and hands-on and figuring out what part you like of the job is probably the most important thing. Because if you're already inspired by it, it's more about figuring out where within that big messy world do you want to dip your toes in.
Yeah, sure. I couldn't agree more. I think, I mentioned my internship with the Nature Conservancy, but then eventually I ended up working as an intern with the World Wildlife Fund as well. And then eventually I think, I'm a visiting scholar now with the Environmental Law Institute, but really I think there was a point after my master's where I was worried about, what I was doing with my job, did I have enough experience? And I really just called them up, it was exploratory, saying, hey, I'm in Miami getting my master's. Would you let me work with you, And and you look back and it looks, your life may look perfectly planned, but it's a lot of To Elliot's point, I think it's a lot of really trying to find those experiences that are going to help you really navigate like what you do not want to do, what you will really want to do, and then realizing like maybe, you know, what's going to get you there in the meantime. And so I always worked when I was going to school. I volunteered a lot, and I think these things change inherently how you see the world and what you do. And to Elliot's point, that's how you get in. And eventually, you know, like I think, you know, to the UN or to these other elements. I will just say for anybody who is, you know, pursuing their education right now, the way that I got into NASA is as a AAAS fellow. So this is an opportunity, you know, for those who are in either engineers or getting their PhDs it's the American Association for the Advancement of Science. They have science, technology, policy fellowships. It's a lot to say, but it's a really incredible opportunity that gives you a way to work with the federal government and connect your interests to policy. So.
Your AAAS fellow example is so much more inspiring than mine. I took an administrative assistant position with the World Wildlife Fund, where I was processing expense reports and stuff and trying to figure out a way of like moving into the more technical work that I wanted to be in.
I went to NASA.
And it was a stepping stone. It was a different kind of experience. You got there.
Yeah, no, it changed my life. Absolutely.
That's awesome. Well, this is sort of a similar, I don't know, similar realm, but different kind of angle. What does a normal day look like for y'all? Let's say pre-COVID world. What does a random Wednesday look like? Shana, do you want to go first?
I mean, yeah, sure. I think, so I work at headquarters for NASA, which is where we're really developing, I think, a lot of the, you know, the goals or the strategic plans for the work that we want to see done across the agency. And I mean, again, I work in Earth Sciences Division. There's also planetary science and heliophysics and a lot of really cool stuff. But you know, we have a lot of meetings, and I would say that's what I normally do a lot of. And you know, hopefully we get them done in person because I am a social person, but that's the truth. We travel a lot, to Elliot's point. I do think, you know, part of really, I think, being successful in this is being able to kind of live through some of what other people's situations are. And so, you know, with the work with Bangladesh, we went into the Rohingya camps. You know, we travel with Mercy Corps to the work in Niger. And so, yeah, if we're not traveling, we're probably, well, I will speak for myself. I am probably in a meeting.
Totally fair.
Yeah.
For me, so I love living in Portland, but I have to say it's like the worst time zone ever to do this job. Because when I wake up in the morning, my East African colleagues are like putting their kids to bed, and my West African colleagues are basically, it's like 4 o'clock, and they're thinking about, you know, ending their day, and my Asia colleagues are totally asleep. So it's challenging. So what it means is that my day pretty much starts off on the phone. And with my colleagues in East Africa for the most part. So I'm often on the phone with a country director or a program lead in Ethiopia, Uganda, Kenya, Somalia, Sudan, South Sudan, one of those folks. Try to hit it in West Africa as well before it gets too late for them. And we're talking about everything from when my next trip is going to be, who on my team they might want to work with. Oftentimes it's like they're trying to, they really want myself or someone on my team to come out and like lead a climate change assessment or lead an assessment on how water resources are being used. Other times it's discussion of like a presentation they wanted me to give as part of a design workshop, that we're going to be designing a new program for like a USAID or the UK government or something. And I need to provide inputs into that. So it can be really varied, but a lot of times the mornings start off on the phone with colleagues, and then the afternoon is actually getting the actual work done. So it's actually, you know, designing the assessment or like getting a team of people to think through a problem or working with a consultant that brings expertise that I don't have or my team doesn't have, and frankly, Mercy Corps might not have. So I might call Shayna and ask her if she's got people on her team that know how to do something, or I might call a consultant that I've worked with in the past and see if they're available, or I'm doing it myself. So.
Elliot made the meeting sound very, very interesting. And ditto for me. I mean, those are meetings, but
Sure.
The cool version that Elliot just said.
Like that cool one.
Yeah.
That sounds great. Well, I'm going to change gears a little bit. I have a question that to me sounds very much like it came from a teacher. Does your partnership offer any kind of virtual field trips where a class could talk with either maybe one of y'all or someone you've worked with the goal being like using, let me make sure I'm interpreting this right, using what NASA and Mercy Corps are partnering and doing to make science research like relatable and connected to something? It's kind of a big question.
I mean, we haven't, I don't rule it out. Let's put it that way. It's not anything that we've discussed, but I think we're constantly, Elliot and I think we plot a lot, and I think we have a lot of hopeful ideas for the future. And I think one of the things we have been exploring, and it's why we were so excited about the event with you and OMSI, is to be able to share the work that we're doing. And so certainly NASA has a lot of interest in sharing from an education platform, the work that's done. So I wouldn't say it's off the table. It hasn't been discussed, but maybe that's something, that we can see as a possibility in the future. It would certainly be interesting. Elliot, do you have any thoughts?
I agree. I'll leave it there.
Cool. Awesome. So this is an interesting question from one of our audience members. Do you feel confident that there will always be a solution to agricultural needs that are affected by climate change? Or do you think that we're reaching a time when communities need to think about moving or living in more temperate climates and to sort of kind of make room in the places? Yeah. Elliot's nodding. You know what I'm talking about. Go for it.
Yeah, sure. That's like the most difficult question ever.
Yeah.
From like an emotional standpoint for people, technical standpoint, or like in terms of being able to predict it. I mean, certainly the reports coming out from the different scientific bodies that study these things indicate that if climate change is to go as far and become as intense as we expect it to be, that there would be a time in which we have to consider those things. At Mercy Corps, we do consider that factor. I do help. One of the things that I help my team think about is, should we invest in agricultural markets in this place or not? Do we see that as sustainable? Is that something we as an institution feel is a ethical thing to do, or should we prioritize alternative and diverse livelihoods that are less climate vulnerable? That's like once you make that decision, you hit a whole bunch of cultural and social, economic, and frankly, more government-focused challenges than even for an NGO like us. But I think the question comes from the place like, will that happen? And I think we're already reaching points in certain places where that does happen. I certainly have been on phone conversations with partner organizations and other NGOs like Mercy Corps and heard them say, we're not investing in that part of Ethiopia for agricultural anymore because it's just too hot and we can't make it work. So we're investing in this area instead, because that's what we want to incentivize. That's what we want to see governments incentivize. So it is a grim reality, but it is a reality.
Yeah, what a rough decision to have to make. Oof.
It's also why I think there is such a need for buy-in and support and like some of these more early efforts from the national level to lead, to really understand what's needed and lead that charge. Because, to Elliot's point about governance, I mean, a lot of times it's the country that's dictating what crops are planted, and when they're going to give access to those crops. And so, I think any of us are only capable of so much, but it's really up to the governments to lead the way, to make, some of these more science-based decisions, and understand that, that first we need to understand the environment and what fragility exists currently, and then better, like in order to better understand, some of these changes that are definitely going to occur.
Yeah, and just to Shana's point, I mean, governments sometimes mandate it. Like, I remember when I first started working in Myanmar, one of the things we were dealing with was that there was a government mandated rice quota, that every farmer had to produce a certain amount of rice, and it was due to the government. And that was dictated. In other times, it's a lot softer, and that governments can provide what are called like extension services, which is like government-owned technical support and services, technical services by agricultural advisors to farmers. And by choosing to give those supports for certain crop types in certain areas, they're incentivizing people to go and undertake those activities in those places. And so if you want to see movement, the best way to do that would be through, government partnership, through working of building capacity of governments to understand it. And so again, it comes down to not one institution, it comes down to a partnership. Big challenges.
Absolutely. Well, then this is going to make the next question. Sorry, I'm being blinded by my window. The next question is sort of maybe smaller scale, but sort of connected. So say perhaps there was an average chemistry teacher living in Portland who maybe is curious about what can just like a single human do who is not an international partnership to help like support this work and what's happening already. I'll give you a second to think, and then I'm going to select Elliot. Do you want to start first? I'm going to close this window so my face doesn't look weird.
Sure. I got it twice, first person twice, I think. So what can the average average potentially chemistry teacher or professor do to be involved? Well, I mean, one thing that I think can be done is just to stay on top of the issues and stay informed by it. I mean, there's so much going on. There's so much information to take in on a daily basis that can make that challenging. But I think the more sort of social support organizations like Mercy Corps have, like NASA have, to work on these challenges. I mean, when you have the opportunity to make your voice heard, that these are issues that you think are important through different government processes, I think that's one of the number one things you can do. If you, for example, we're all here in the U.S. If you want to see these issues be important, that's where you have the chance to make your voice heard through talking with your representatives, through being involved in civil society and things like that. And the more you can stay informed and be an active, educated person on what the challenges are and what you think the potential solutions are, the more you'll be able to be an informed participant in that discussion. I think that's honestly like the number one thing you can do right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's kind of it's a two-part question. I think that, as an individual, in any situation, it only takes one person. I think, we talk a lot about emergencies and crises and all of these things, and it can seem overwhelming, but one person does matter. One person is still part of a movement, even if you're a scattered movement. And so I think especially you learn this all the time in policy studies. I mean, everything started because one person, had a feeling about something and was able to raise their voice in the way that they felt about something in a way that gave their opinion agency. And so I think you've got that ahead, going, for us in relation to what Elliot said. And then I would say that it's a chemistry teacher. I mean, this is the foundational science for the environment. And, you're reaching young minds. You're really able to connect the society. You're helping build our future. And so, I mean, frankly, I would say that, keep it up. Make sure that, that who you teach knows, about, not just the chemistry itself. I mean, like I said, it took going to the Nature Conservancy to see the real potential of environmental science for me. And I think the same is true for chemistry. If you can, make those connections and say, and this is why it matters, then suddenly you've given somebody a whole new trajectory on life, that maybe they didn't know existed beforehand.
That is, yeah, Shane, I totally agree with
you. That turned into an incredibly self-serving question, but thanks, guys. I feel empowered.
Teachers, they're important. I mean, they have an
I'm biased. I think so too. Okay. Sorry. Now I'm thinking about how much I want to get back to my lab. Okay. I have what I'm reading is a very specific question now from an audience member. Are there any programs that you are working on that involve rebuilding forests on mountains to increase the weather patterns that support rain systems? And I don't know if this is a better question for one of you than the other.
I'll go first because I'll keep my.
Could you just repeat it real quick before Elliot takes it, and then I'll.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, it's pretty specific. Are there any programs that you're working on involving rebuilding rainforests on mountains to increase the weather patterns that support rain systems?
Okay.
Got it.
Thank you.
Okay.
So for Mercy Corps, we have done some reforestation programs, and I would say that those are really challenging for a number of respects. The one being that it doesn't really make sense to reforest anything if you don't destroy the incentive for cutting down that forest in the first place. And so you have to couple that with like some sort of socioeconomic, cultural understanding that while replanting or incentivize replanting by government or community members, you're also dealing with the fact that those people or those entities or institutions were one of the main reasons it was brought down in the first place. So Mercy Corps doesn't have like a ton of work in explicit reforestation projects. We partner with conservation organizations that tend to focus on that work. A lot of our work that does touch on that, though, is all more what we would call in the climate smart or climate resilient agriculture. Because reforesting landscapes, whether it's mountainsides or whatever, it isn't just good from a climate perspective, but it's also good from an agricultural productivity perspective. It returns nutrients to the soil. It helps reduce erosion and other related environmental problems. It also attracts pollinators and other insects that are beneficial to farmers. So there's a whole host of reasons to do it. Oftentimes reforestation from a climate perspective is not initially the number one or first or most direct reason that we're doing it. Yeah, I'll leave it there.
I mean, no. I would say that
Totally okay.
For us, where you would see NASA is when you're wanting to understand, what the deforestation rate looked like, maybe look to what other reforested areas, saw after they were planted. Did they see, to Elliot's point, people come back in and just deforest or slash and burn, et cetera. So we can help you see the success of your efforts or maybe the lack of, and give you a perspective of it. But we're not going to be, on the ground leading those efforts.
Sure. That makes a lot of sense.
Just one thing of like total real life example of where this.
Go for it.
It was like a month ago. Our team is putting in a new program in Sudan. It's a program to look at like climate smart agriculture. It's working with ag producers to make sure that they are able to produce more food faster, more efficiently, and work with the local agricultural markets to make sure that they're providing seeds, fertilizers, and other things that farmers need to be more productive. One of the things we realized in the program is if you look at the history of deforestation in the area, is that land is so cheap and land security is so loose that if you're more productive, you're just going to deforest more land. So if we were successful in the program goals of increasing agricultural productivity without addressing the issues, the other sort of economic and social issues surrounding that stuff, we would have ended up inadvertently deforesting more parts of Sudan than we would have wanted to, obviously. So that's just a really good example of where like you can be working on an ag program and need to consider the sort of environmental aspects, and you can be working on an environment thing and have to consider the social and economic challenges as well. So maybe slightly off topic, but it brought that up in my mind when I heard that question.
No, that's great. That's really interesting. It's never just one isolated problem because everything's connected.
It's always trade-offs.
Yeah.
Everywhere
Interesting.
you go.
Interesting. challenging. Thanks, guys. Okay, I have a couple more. Is there a particular project that you're like most proud of, or that really stands out to you, that's making positive changes for climate change or in a particular community? And this might be stepping on toes of things that you've already mentioned, but opening that up again. Shayna, do you want to go first for this one?
Sure. I mean, I would say that, I mean, it's not, you know, some of what we've talked about is not directly climate change linked, right? I mean, you know that it's a driver of some of what I've talked about, but it's not necessarily like the main focus. But I would say that, I mean, the work that we did in Bangladesh was incredible. You know, and I think, you know, I only see similar feelings of success with our work with Mercy Corps. And so, you know, the work that Elliot started out, you know, giving as an example for us, and the issues of, you know, transhumance, resilience, et cetera, in Mali and across the Sahel, I think we're really, you know, kind of tackling the problem from multiple perspectives. It's really creating almost a system of our own that mimics what you see in the natural environment in order to understand all the complexities. You know, it's interdisciplinary. It's a very, you know, let's just cut to the chase. And so, you know, this often doesn't happen, right? You know, you get one person maybe that understands water, maybe one person that gets the economy, but sometimes we're often missing some of these elements. And I think the work that we're trying to do is really trying to replicate, I think, all of the different challenges that are happening simultaneously. So what does that matter? And, you know, how can we try to be better at understanding the trade-offs before we fall victim to them? And I think that's the point. So for me, I would say in the past, the Rohingya work, quite valuable. And then moving forward, I'm excited about a partnership.
Yeah, I mean, for me, this work with Agrifin, the bringing NASA into something that we know is a proven program example, and now we're gonna like bring NASA on top of that, bring everything that comes with that to that challenge. It's just incredibly exciting. But because I've pointed that out already, and we've already talked about it, another example that I think is really, really cool, because I think we're gonna try to replicate it in a number of places, and it solves a problem that's all over the world, is on flooding. And the reason I think this is cool is because I watched an organization like learn in real time. We had this program that worked in really large cities in Indonesia called the Asian Cities Climate Change Resilience Network, a real mouthful of a program name, ACER it was called. And it didn't work quite at the scale of like the mega cities in Indonesia. It wasn't like Jakarta, for example, which is like an endlessly large city, right? But it was still really pretty big. And in many of those places, they're dealing with a whole host of flooding issues. We were working with those city government officials to build their capacity to understand the climate change and flooding related challenges. So those city practitioners, those government employees of the city could budget, plan, run their own vulnerability assessments, try out things to reduce vulnerabilities of the neighborhoods and communities they were working for. But by the end of the program, one thing became abundantly clear, is that if we didn't invest in the broader sort of watershed of which the bigger landscape that these cities were a part of, that we would never have addressed the issue of flooding in the first place. It would always take constant effort and resources by those cities. And so I got to interact and work with a team that, one, recognized that, and two, put a project in place called Transform, which was building on that work to take a citywide program and turn it into a whole watershed scale. And it basically worked on governance. It worked with government, like subnational governments, or like at the county level, or I forget what they call it there, county or ward like level, and brought them all together across the watershed, all around the common challenge of flooding, and created a new platform that would look to reduce flooding. And in doing so, we brought some really, really crazy smart environmental modelers who used NASA data, in fact, to help inform some of the models they were developing of like why why the issues of flooding were happening, what environmental restoration work could be used to reduce those flooding issues, and then inform those committees, those subnational government actors on how to have those implemented, the budget repercussions of them. And Mercy Corps worked with them to form the advocacy groups then to advocate for national government resources to support those subnational decision makers and actually implementing them. So it's cool. I get really inspired when I get to see people learn and move from one idea to another, like really big idea.
That's super duper cool. Really awesome. Sorry, I was just, yeah, that's really amazing. Well, that was the last official question I have. So do y'all have any other final thoughts? Anything you really want to share before we start wrapping this up?
No, just thank you so much for this opportunity. I think it's been not only exciting for us, but really it's been a pleasure to work with all of you. So thank you very much.
Thank y'all both.
Yeah, thanks everyone for choosing to spend a little bit of your evening with us. We really appreciate it. It was great to talk with you, and thanks for the questions, really fun ones.
Yeah, thank you both. Awesome. Well, to everyone out there, we are going to start wrapping it up here. So I hope you enjoyed tonight's event. If you would like to watch the video again or share it with any friends or family who might have missed it, check out the video section on OMSI's Facebook page or our YouTube channel. And please consider supporting Science Pub and making a couple $1 donation via the Facebook donate button, or you can visit omsi.edu/donate. And we're excited. I hope you enjoyed OMSI's Virtual Science Pub, and we're excited about the opportunity to host more virtual learning with everything that's going on and while we're practicing social distancing. So once again, real quick, thank you to our partner Celestream for helping to make tonight's event possible, and to our sponsor Automation Solutions. Be sure to follow our Facebook page for automatic updates on future events and content from OMSI. And if you're available, join us next week, Tuesday, May 12th at 6:30 p.m. to find out how seismologists and engineers actually compute seismic hazard and how it relates to risk and what we know and don't know about seismic hazard in Cascadia with Dr. Valerie, I'm going to butcher this last name, Sahakian, Assistant Professor of the Department of Earth Sciences at University of Oregon. You can visit our website, omsi.edu/Science Pub for more details. And with that, thank you everybody and have an awesome night.
Thanks so much.
Thanks y'all.